Some persons suffering with SRA and DID are very difficult to identify because they don't have any really strong symptoms that could be identified as being severe abuse. And yet they need our help just as much as those who have those symptoms need our help. Often these people will never go to a counselor. They just go through life missing out on many good things that God has for them. So I wanted to share the story from my book, Restoring Survivors of Satanic Ritual Abuse, Equipping and Releasing God's People for Spirit-Empowered Ministry. This is the story of Carl. Carl, a man in his 60s, is a sincere Christian man who has wholeheartedly pursued a relationship with Jesus Christ for many decades. My husband and I have known him for many years. He's basically healthy, has a happy marriage, a nice home, good church relationships, and seemingly everything he could need to be happy. However, Carl has never been able to overcome his feelings that he would just rather go be with Jesus. He often feels that he wants to leave everything and go live in a cabin in the mountains of Montana. His faithful pursuit of God has brought many victories in his life, but deep down he has never felt happy or fulfilled in life. Noticing that there was no current reason for Carl to feel this way, my husband and I began to suspect that he was experiencing emotions connected to some serious childhood abuse issues that needed ministry. Carl was very open to talking with us about his feelings. I began to write down every indicator of abuse we discerned. Writing things down or making a list helps us get below the surface of what appears to be a normal life and discern whether or not there has been abuse. When many indicators are present, even though there are no abuse memories, it is extremely likely that the person was seriously abused. The first thing we noticed about Carl was that he had dissociated. He had absolutely no memories of his childhood before the age of 6. Other entire years of his life seemed to be missing, as he had no recollection of them. His wife indicated what we had also observed, that you never knew what mood Carl would be in. There were times when he appeared happy, and his wonderful sense of humor would have all of us laughing. But more often than not, Carl would be quiet, speaking only when spoken to, and just sitting in front of his computer, playing computer games for hours on end. It was obvious that he had built up many walls to hide behind that no one could penetrate. His wife told us that Carl sometimes had no memory of things they had done together just days earlier. It soon became evident that Carl had different alters that were out at different times. He was not moody, he was dissociated. He could switch in an instant from happy and communicative to silent and reserved. Carl had been an officer in the United States Marine Corps. He had a big gun collection and loved to shoot, but at the same time he liked stuffed animals, an indication that he had some child alters. There were many signs of abuse in his life. Carl was good at acting like he had no problems, but actually he had suffered from depression all his life. He just didn't talk about it. He hated himself and felt he was somehow defective and inferior to others. He felt that he had been destined for failure in life, that he could never succeed no matter how hard he tried. This left him feeling hopeless, with the anticipation that he would always fail in everything he attempted. Others could see that he was gifted, that he was an intelligent person who had helped many people, and that the world was much better because he was in it, but there was no way to make him see this about himself. People close to Carl sensed that he was angry. He controlled his anger well, but it erupted from time to time in frustration over little things in life. When we talked with him about anger, he admitted that it was like a deep pit inside him that was constantly seething. He had just learned to keep the lid on it. When children are mistreated, they get angry and will remain angry until they receive ministry for their abuse. Carl was able to remember cutting himself when he was an adolescent. He took a sharp knife and started beating the palm of his hand with the blade until his hand was all bloody. He had to be careful to conceal it from his parents until it was healed. He doesn't remember why he did it, but he must have felt extreme emotional distress to do such a thing. Cutting was another item to add to our list. A tendency towards addictions had been with him all his life. Cigarettes, alcohol, food, and computer games headed the list. He had overcome most of these with God's help, but he still needed sweets and snacks as comfort foods. Carl's family attended church faithfully, but it was the kind of church you could attend for years without ever hearing the gospel message. One time he and his mother attended a service in a different church where Carl heard the gospel presented in a way he could understand. When the invitation was made for people to come down front, Carl rose to go down, but his mother held him back. God saw his heart, though, and Carl was drawn to his Heavenly Father and began seeking a relationship. He read the Bible every night all the years of his youth. Years later he accepted the call into full-time pastoral ministry. One can't help wondering why his mother held him back. Was she in a hurry to leave because it was late? Did it make her feel that she had not done a good job of raising her son in the church? Would she experience the wrath of her husband if she allowed her son to go down front and he found out about it? We will never know, but it is just another memory for Carl that fit into the pattern of always being held back from the things he wanted to do. As we talked further with Carl, we began to see overwhelming evidence of satanic ritual abuse in his life. We had known a lot of these facts about him, but until these indicators were listed on paper, we had no idea there were so many. If there had been only a few, we would not have suspected SRA, but in Carl's case the list was very long. The evidence was indisputable. Here are some of the evidences of SRA we found. Carl was dismayed that his parents never showed him any affection. He was not kissed, hugged, patted on the back, or in any way shown affection. The only time his father spoke to him was to correct him in a harsh tone of voice that registered to Carl as disgust and disdain. As an adult looking back, he felt that his mother loved him, but was not able to express herself in an affectionate way. This was a strong indicator of SRA, because in Satanism, the chosen child is not to be shown affection. The mother often wants to express demonstrable love to the child, but is forbidden to by the father. Carl lamented that part of him felt dead inside. He had been faithful in prayer, Bible study, and his pursuit of God. He knew he had a relationship with Jesus Christ, but somehow this dead part never came alive. This was an indication that dissociated parts were locked away inside in inaccessible places, such as dungeons, mazes, or boxes. Carl was raised with the impression that he was not very bright intellectually. In adulthood, he took a battery of tests related to his work that indicated he had a very high IQ and should have been a scientist or medical doctor. This made him feel that he had been ripped off, held back, and not allowed to succeed. SRA children are usually very bright, but are programmed to believe they are stupid. Success often eludes their grasp. Carl was accident-prone, a strong indicator of curses on his life. Anyone who knew him was aware that he often had gashes on his head and was running into things. His wife said she could not count all the times she had helped stop the bleeding on his head after he rammed it into the corner of a shelf, the trunk of the car, a kitchen cabinet door, or whatever. There had been numerous wood-cutting accidents, including a chainsaw cut to his knee and a missing fingertip from an axe mishap. But with all the stubbed toes and other painful episodes, there was a certain grace of God upon his life. God's hand was upon him. God had ministry plans for his life, and the enemy was only allowed to go so far but no further. This tendency for accidents is a common indication of SRA. Some SRA persons, rather than having accidents, have numerous sicknesses, or they may be plagued with both. Carl had an unexplained fear of heights. He had no remembrance of why this would be, but he never went near the window in a tall building. This, too, is a common indicator of SRA. Children are often dangled off the edge of a high cliff or bridge and threatened in some way in order to gain control over them and make them dissociate. The strongest indicator of SRA was found in the fact that his father and one of his grandfathers had been 32nd degree Masons. Carl's first and middle name were his grandfather's name. His grandfather had been the worshipful master of the lodge in his hometown. It is well known that high-degree Masons are often into Satanism. His grandfather was also German. There is a lot of Satanism in families with Germanic heritage. With all the things I've indicated here, plus others that were not mentioned, it was certain in our minds that Carl was satanically ritually abused. After much prayer, we decided to tell him our findings. Sometimes we wait until the person has a memory, but the Lord indicated we were to tell him what we had discovered. As Carl thought about this, it seemed incredulous, but he could see that the evidence was strong. We continued to pray for him, and it was not long until he had a memory, and other things happened that left no doubt about the nature of his abuse. So Carl is someone who had tried all his life to come out of these feelings of depression and the difficulties of his life, and he was never able to until he understood that he had different parts that he had dissociated. And it just took the mystery off of things that happened to him that he could never understand. We were able to minister to parts. We had specific knowledge now of how to pray. And God gave revelation in dreams. There were things now that God was free to show him that God could not show him before because he would not have understood them. And so God was good to reveal things in dreams. As far as just having memories with us, Carl only had one or two. He just didn't work that way. Another thing to help was disconnecting from a family member that was obvious was causing distress in Carl's life. And it was a big decision for him to make. This was difficult. But he could see that every time this person was around him or called him, Carl got depressed, and sometimes he would be in a depression for a couple of days. So he did that disconnect. Also, he had a very loving church around him, people who had also been abused, who understood. And they were able to love Carl into wholeness. That's part of the whole thing, is just knowing that you're loved and that people accept you for who you are. Carl was faithful to continue in his devotions and his obedience to Christ. And God can do amazing things when we are faithful to Him. And so this is the story of Carl and how Carl came out of this and was healed.